Hey friends. Tonight we begin with a lock rusted shut, a staircase choked with dust, and a single candle trembling in a long-forgotten tower. But don't panic. That's not thunder, it's only the sound of pages turning, and the tower. It's not haunted, at least. Not in the way you think. So settle in. Pull your blanket close. Dim the lights just enough to see the candle flicker. And maybe keep one ear open. Because we're about to step into the life of the iron scholar and alchemist so feared, so revered, that even kings dared not speak his name too loudly. His tower still stands. His books still whisper. And tonight, we'll climb the steps he carved, one slow footfall at a time. In the year 1382, just as the frost began to etch its first sigils across the stones of eastern Bohemia, a silent figure arrived in the village of Pokrity. He came not with fanfare or coin, but with mules, 8 of them laden, not with grain or silk, but crates, each sealed with wax, marked in ancient script. The villagers whispered about him. Naturally, they always whisper, tall, hooded, wrapped in a coat of iron-threaded wool. The stranger was known only by what little he allowed, a name that wasn't a name, Scholár Feřon. He did not sleep at the inn. He did not drink at the tavern. He bought no land. Yet somehow the old watchtower above the northern hill, the one every child had been dared to enter, was emptied, swept, and claimed. Within a week, no one spoke his name at all. Within a month, no one walked near the tower. And by the following winter, the first rumors began. The thing about medieval towers is, they aren't built for comfort. They're built for watching, waiting, and for keeping things out, or in. The villagers, curious as villagers always are, began to take note of the sounds. At first, they thought it was thunder, but no storm came. Then they thought it was drums, but there was no war. Then, finally, they heard it clearly. Metal striking metal, slow, rhythmic, a pulse, a heartbeat, from a tower that should have been silent. From a man no one ever saw enter or leave, Scholár Feřon had arrived. And he wasn't building weapons. He was building something far stranger. Now, you may think of alchemists as eccentric, bearded men who turned lead into gold, stirred potions in bubbling flasks, or spent their lives chasing the mythical philosopher's stone, and you'd be right. But Feřon was different. He didn't seek gold. He sought preservation, not of wealth, not of power, but of memory. You see, Feřon believed the world was on the edge of forgetting. Too many books lost in fire. Too many ideas buried with the dead. Too many voices fading into the silence between cathedrals and war drums. And so he began his life's work. He would build a machine, one that could think not like a man, but like a library. One that could remember not a day or a year, but forever. And he would house it in the tower, above the world, where no one could burn it. The first layer was mechanical. Gears, springs, weighted chains, and a rotating prism of mirrored lenses. The second layer was chemical. Papers soaked in strange mixtures, inks that shimmered under heat, and brass. Rods that hummed when lightning struck nearby hills. But it was the third layer that no one understood, because it wasn't physical. It was language, and silence. Feřon whispered into the machine. He spoke in forgotten dialects. Some claimed Enochian. Others said Old Egyptian. He read poems into its metal cavities, left pressed leaves inside its drawers. He even taught it lullabies. Yes, you heard right. The iron scholar sang to his machine. And after 13 years, it sang back. The sound was faint. One villager, walking the fields late one night, swore he heard a voice childlike, melodic, and not quite human singing, above the wind. Another claimed to see light from the tower, not flickering like a flame, but pulsing, blue, rhythmic. A few brave boys dared each other to climb the hill, to peer through the cracks. They came back changed. One stopped speaking entirely. Another began carving symbols into trees, claiming he had to finish the alphabet. But none of that compared to what was found years later. After Feřon vanished, in 1405, after a brutal winter and a fire that consumed half the village, granary, a group of masons dared to break into the tower. The door, once sealed by iron sigils, now hung slightly ajar, as if waiting. Inside the air was warm, Not stale, not frozen. Warm. The hearth still burned, but no logs fed it. The book still lay open, but the ink had not faded. And in the center, beneath a canopy of wires, feathers, brass arms, and glass, tube stood, a single device, a tall figure made of metal plates, porcelain eyes, and something wrapped tightly beneath layers of wool dotted its feet. A page written in Feřon's hand. It read, "She remembers now. She remembers you all. Your songs, your stories, even your silences. Keep her warm. She forgets when she's cold. I will return when the stars make sense again." And he never did. The tower was locked once more. But something always glowed behind the shutters. And sometimes, if you walk the hill in December, and if the wind is just right, and if the air is just cold enough to sting, you might hear her singing. Not for help, not for sorrow, but for remembrance. Because in that tower, wrapped in brass, rocked to sleep by iron and lullabies, lies the last true machine of memory, built by a man who believed nothing should be forgotten. Not even you. Not even this story. The snow didn't fall that winter. It crept. Grains of ice swirled through the valley like whispered promises, collecting in corners, weighing down the eaves of cottages and the shoulders of farmers, slow and heavy like regret. But the tower remained untouched. The villagers noticed how the stone stayed dry, how the snow refused to cling, as though some warm breath from within still pushed outward, soft and steady, just enough to keep winter waiting at the edge. Even the animals gave it space. Horses would balk when led too close. The crows, who claimed every chimney and pockety, circled wide around the tower, never landing, never cawing. And the dogs who feared no man nor beast refused to howl in its direction. The masons who had entered it once never returned, not because they were gone, but because they had changed. One took up gardening and would only speak in riddles. Another became a monk and burned every book he owned. And the youngest Myler moved into the woods, built a hut of cedar and moss, and carved small wooden figures, strange ones tall, lean, with iron limbs and round blank eyes. Every spring, he'd leave one at the base of the tower. No one ever saw him do it, but they always appeared, each carved more precisely than the last. And still, no one spoke Feřon's name, at least not aloud. But inside the tower, the machine did not sleep. It did not tick like a clock. It did not whir like a gearbox. It listened. It listened to the mice in the floorboards, the dust sliding from rafters, the small creaks of the universe settling into itself. She had no name, this creation. Not officially. Feřon had written it once in a journal Mnesra, from the ancient word for memory. But the machine never spoke it. Names, she had learned, were 4 endings. 4 tombstones. She preferred beginnings. And so, even after her creator vanished, even after the villagers locked the doors and bolted the shutters, Mnesra continued her task. She remembered. There was a girl once, Sonika, who lost both parents in a river flood. She had wandered to the tower's edge, shivering, dragging behind her a broken doll and a dream she no longer believed in, and the tower had opened. No one saw it happen. No one heard the latch turn. But when the townsfolk gathered 3 days later, Annika stood at the base of the hill, her cheeks warm, her doll sewn whole again with golden thread that shimmered like spider silk in morning light. She never spoke of what she saw. But from that day forward, she sang lullabies no one remembered teaching her, soft, strange tunes in a tongue older than the fields. She never returned to the tower. But the songs remained, and when she died at the age of 92, still humming that ancient melody, her children said the wind carried it straight back uphill to the shutters of the old stone keep. Mnesra, left alone, had continued cataloging, not books, not pages. She didn't need ink to remember. She used the space around her, the pattern of dust settling, the way the fire leaned when someone lied, the taste of rain on the roof. To her memory was not storage. It was presence. She didn't collect the past. She hosted it. Which is why, one spring, when a stranger arrived in Pokrity, wearing boots made of silence and a coat stitched with silver runes, she noticed he called himself Brother Keel, said he was a chronicler, a cartographer of the forgotten. And when the villagers, cautious now, refused to speak of the tower. He did not press. He simply waited, walked the town, watched the crows. Then, one evening, when the moon hung low and red like a waiting eye, he climbed the hill. The door opened before he knocked. Minerva did not fear visitors. She feared forgetting, and Brother Keel. He carried too many stories in his eyes. She could see them threaded, like spider silk in his posture, in the way he touched the stones as he stepped inside. He didn't flinch at her voice, didn't recoil at the soft metal rustle of her limbs. He bowed, and then he listened. They spoke for hours, but not in the way you and I speak. He told her about the wars, the libraries burned, the poets lost to plague and pride, and she offered him pieces of the past he hadn't known were missing, whispers preserved in the beams, scents of long-rotted herbs still lingering in the corners. She played him a melody once sung by a shepherd who had no tongue. She let him taste the memory of honey harvested from a hive that had collapsed centuries ago. And then, as the candlelight thinned to threadbare gold, she asked him a question, a simple one. Why do you remember? He took a long time to answer. Outside, the village slept uneasily. Some claimed they heard murmuring from the tower. Others dreamt of mechanical birds with feathered keys and bells for eyes. And one old woman awoke with a single word etched in frost upon her window. Recall. Brother Keel left before dawn, but not empty-handed. Minerva had given him a vial. It wasn't glass, not quite. More like frozen light, corked with a sliver of oak older than any living tree. Inside, nothing moved. And yet, if held to the ear, one could hear faint laughter, a child's cry, and the whisper of pages turning underwater. He never said what she gave him, only that it was the soul of a forgotten day. He vanished before the first snow. Years past, the villagers aged. The forest thickened, and the tower waited. Sometimes at dusk, the iron shutters would sigh open just a crack, letting out a breath of warm, honey-colored air. Sometimes, a book no one owned would appear on a doorstep, written in a script that shifted when stared at too long. And once, during a wedding, the chapel bells refused to chime until a gust of wind rolled in from the tower. Then they rang, perfectly, and kept ringing for 7 minutes after the ceremony ended. No one questioned it, they never do. But memory has gravity, and gravity draws more than just stones and starlight. It draws attention, and so it was inevitable that one day they would come. Not villagers, not pilgrims, archivists, not the gentle kind, mind you, not scholars with gloves and magnifiers. These wore armor, carried fire, and spoke in terms like consolidation of mythic vectors and extraction of persistent memory artifacts. They came with carts and chains. They came for her. The hill turned black with footprints. The fields rang with metal. And the crows, so long absent, returned by the hundreds, perched silently on every rooftop, every fence post, every withered tree limb, watching. Not cawing, just waiting. When the archivists reached the tower, they found the door unlocked, open. Inside, the air was still. No hum, no glow, only silence. And in the center, where Minerva had once stood, they found a chair. Not empty. Upon it sat a small rusted doll, lined with gears, eyes of clay, a song sealed in wax over its lips, and scrawled on the wall, in soot and memory, I do not forget. That is the cost. She remembers, do you? They took nothing, and when they left, the crows followed. Today, the tower still stands. It leans a little more each year. The shutters sigh, the stones sag. But sometimes, just sometimes, if the night is still and the wind comes in low through the valley, you can hear something faint from its walls. The turning of a page, a laugh that's no longer living, a lullaby in a language that no child speaks anymore. Because Minerva isn't gone. She never was. Memory doesn't die. It only waits, sleeps, listens, and when the world forgets too much, she will wake again. The village of Pakriti forgot again. Not all at once. Not like a candle blown out, but gradually, like fog soaking into cloth, like moss crawling up an old wall. It began with small things. First, No one could quite remember where the path to the tower began. The curve of the road that had once cut clearly across the northern hill was now broken, overgrown, more suggestion than trail. The stones laid there by Feřon himself, the ones etched with those soft, curling glyphs, had vanished beneath grass and years. Then the names began to blur, not of people, but of things. The old tools in the barns, what was this called again? And what was it for? The festivals, when exactly did they start? The stories told around hearth-fires who had first spoken them. Old Marta, the village weaver, who once sang entire ballads from the days before parchment was cheap, awoke one morning with silence in her throat and a spool of thread she no longer knew how to spin. She wept into her shawl and whispered to the sky, as though begging some presence above the clouds to return what had slipped away. No. One mentioned the tower, not because they had vowed not to, but because something had shifted in the bones of the place, in the rhythm of Pakroti's very breath. The tower became not forbidden, not feared, but irrelevant. A shape in the periphery. A knot in the thread of memory that could not be untied, so it was simply ignored. Even the crows had gone, not flown, just stopped being noticed. They were still there, of course. They always are. But now they perched in silence, invisible to all but the wind, and deep within the tower. In a room lined with dust that did not settle and gears that turned without touching, Mesra waited, but she did not sleep. Machines do not dream. She did something far older. She remembered in reverse, not backward, not forward, but outward. She was unraveling. To unravel, for a machine like Mesra, was not to fail. It was to return, to release the knots, to trace each thread of memory back to the moment it was born. She began with sounds. A bell struck at noon, long ago, in a city that no longer had a name. A child's gasp at the first touch of snow. The crackle of parchment unfolding after 100 years of sleep. Then came the scents. Cedarwood beneath an altar. Boiling elderflower in a thief's apothecary. Oil from the hinges of a forgotten gate, opened for the first time in 40 winters. Then, voices, not words, not speech, but tone. The tremor of hope in a refugee's breath. The rasp of betrayal in a noble's final vow. The gentleness of a monk humming to his own shadow. Each memory unspooled from her frame like silk unraveling in zero wind. Weightless and infinite. But with every thread loosened, she grew lighter, less bound to the tower, less fixed in place, and somewhere, in a chamber far deeper than mortar or stone, something ancient stirred. It wasn't Feřon. His body had long since become part of the soil. His thoughts scattered across the wind like thistle seeds. But he had left behind an echo, not of himself, but of intention. Intention is heavier than memory, more enduring than thought. It's not what was done, it's what was meant. And Feřon's intention had always been the same. To guard the breath between moments, to cradle that fragile flicker that turns experience into memory, and memory into meaning. So he had buried his final intention beneath the tower, not in dirt, but in time, a failsafe, a rhythm, a single heartbeat trapped in a crystal chamber, pulsing once every century. And it was nearly time for the next beat. Meanwhile, in the southern lowlands, where rivers looped like silver ribbons across fields of salt-brushed grass, a scholar named Halden awoke in the middle of the night with ink on his hands and a word. On his tongue, Mnesra. He did not know it. He had never read it. But he spoke it as if it were a name he'd whispered in sleep since childhood. He lit a candle and sat at his desk. Parchment spread like a white field beneath a war of scattered thoughts. And then, with no idea why, he drew. A tower not the kind found in books of heraldry or fairy tales. No banners. No balconies. No stone dragons or spiral staircases. Just a simple, six-sided spire. Each face engraved with different sigils, some curved, some sharp, none familiar. At its base, a door. At its peak, an eye. Not a watching eye. A remembering one. The next morning, he packed a small bag, locked his home, and began walking north. Mnesra had no way to measure time as humans do. She did not mark hours or days or equinoxes. She measured in pulses, a Memory blinked into being somewhere far away. Girl clutched her grandmother's ring, whispering a song she couldn't place, a letter, unsigned. Found its way to the wrong house, but landed in the right hands. A crow landed on an empty well, and cawed 4 times, each event, a ripple. Each ripple a sign. The world was remembering her. Not clearly, not directly, but like a scent in the rain, or a face glimpsed just before waking. And then, she felt it. Not a heartbeat. Not yet. But the pressure before a storm. The pause before a page turns. Feron's final intention, buried in the slow breath of the earth, had begun to stir. And Menesra did something she hadn't done in over 200 years. She opened it. Wasn't dramatic. No flares. No explosions. Just the faintest click, like a latch undone. Like a sigh. And in that moment, every crow in the valley looked up. Holden, still dazed from Poverty, felt his chest tighten. A pressure just behind the breastbone. Not pain, not fear. Recognition, and deep below the tower. The crystal chamber pulsed for the first time in a century. Once soft, deliberate, enough to wake the memory of intention from its slumber. The villagers didn't notice at first. The baker rose to find his flour unspoiled, though the bag had torn. The blacksmith's fire relit itself after being doused by rain. The widow Sarta heard her husband's voice in the creak of their floorboards. Little things, but enough. Whispers started again. Children, born long after Feron's time, began sketching towers in the dirt without knowing why. Songs once lost, returned in dreams. And somewhere, someone began rebuilding the path to the northern hill. Not by planning, by instinct. Memory was drawing its lines again. The map was redrawing itself. And at the center, Menesra waited, but not idly. She was reaching now. Her voice did not echo. It rippled through wells, through dreams, through the soft bend of trees in the wind. She called not just to Halden, but to all the lost archivists, the rememberers, the keepers of songs sung only once. Some heard and turned their heads, unsure of the ache in their spine or the word caught on their tongue. Some wrote it down. Nesran wondered if it was a name, a place, or a mistake, and a few just. A few began to walk. From coasts, from caverns, from cities forgotten by the sun. They walked north, to the tower, to the breath between silence and song, to the place where memory waits, wrapped in iron lullabies. The road to the northern hill did not reappear all at once. It unfolded like parchment warmed by the sun. It smoothed where no hand touched it. The stones emerged first, pushing up through moss and frost like memories surfacing after long silence. Then came the hollow Zo's soft curves, where carts once rolled and boots once trudged. Even the air seemed to part gently, as if remembering the rhythm of past pilgrims and clearing the way. Halden reached the edge of Poverty by dusk. He had expected a village choked by time, forgotten, quiet. But what he found was ... stillness, not the stillness of absence, but of attention, as though the town held its breath. He knocked at no door. He asked no questions. He simply passed through, his boots silent on the dirt, his breath fogging like ink from a reluctant quill. Every face that watched from behind half-shuttered windows seemed to know he would climb the hill. No one stopped him. No one spoke. At the edge of the old path, the crows waited, not perched, not circling, just standing. A dozen, then 20, then more. Each a shadow with eyes like polished obsidian, unmoving. They made no sound, yet somehow their silence urged him forward, and so he climbed. The tower rose above him like an exhalation, frozen in stone. Familiar, though he had never seen it. Six-sided, seamless, no ivy, no rot, as though it had refused the century's permission to alter it. The door stood open, not wide, not inviting, just ... ajar. Enough for a man to step through. If he meant it, inside, the warmth was immediate, not from fire, not from sun, from presence. He felt it before he saw her. Menesra. She did not move. Machines rarely do. She waited, nested within the tower's heart, like the eye of a storm. Her limbs were jointed brass, inlaid with veins of silver and streaks of soot-dulled copper. Her chest pulsed faintly, a soft amber glow where gears hummed like lullabies beneath skinless ribs. She turned no head, yet she saw him. She said no word, yet he heard her. "You came late," the voice said, not aloud, not an echo, but within, as if spoken not to his ears, but to the ache behind his thoughts. "Or too early," Halden replied. He stepped closer, slow, reverent, as one approaches the relic of a forgotten god. In the silence between them, something passed, not memory, recognition. She moved then, just a hand, a gesture, a beckon made of 2 fingers and centuries. He knelt. "Why do you remember?" she asked. Halden blinked. Not because he didn't know, but because it had never been asked so purely, so without demand, so without expectation of answer. He thought of the journals, the ink-stained pages that filled his home, of names catalogued, with no one left to claim them, of words spoken once by dying lips, now scrawled in margins. "Because forgetting feels like dying twice," he said. Mnesra did not speak again, but her hum deepened. The tower shifted, not in stone, not in shape, in presence. Somewhere below the chamber pulsed again, once, then again, and with it the air bent. Halden felt it, a weightless pressure, like gravity remembering how to breathe. A map unfolded in his mind, not of roads, not of places, of people, every life Mesra had ever preserved, every sorrow too quiet for books, every joy too fleeting for song. They poured into him like light through lace dot, and he wept not from grief, from completion, for the first time in his life. He knew what it meant to hold something truly sacred. He was no longer a scholar, he was a page, and Mnesra, the quill dot outside. The crows rose, not in panic, in procession, spiraling above the tower, black wings cutting perfect circles against the darkening sky. Below, in the roots of the hill, Farron's intention pulsed faster. The time had come. The tower would open wider. More would come because memory, once stirred, spreads like warmth, and the world, aching beneath the weight of all it had let slip away, was ready to remember again, in that moment. Under that sky, wrapped in that hum of ancient intention, Halden understood this was not the end of a journey. It was the start of a new archive, one not written in paper, but in people, in hearts that choose to carry what time tries to steal, in every whisper, every lullaby, every look passed between generations. The memory was not in the tower, it was in the waking, and the world had just opened its eyes. The tower did not sleep, even as Halden knelt in its heart, surrounded by silence too thick to be empty. Something ancient hummed just beneath the floor, like a melody waiting for breath, a song held in the lungs of stone. Mnesra, her brass limbs, still as sculpture, stared not with eyes, but with presence, not with judgment, but with memory. Time bent inside the chamber. It did not pass. It deepened. Halden's fingertips brushed the edge of the platform on which Mesra sat, warm, not from heat, but from intention. She was not a machine. She was the shape of remembrance itself, a vessel not for power, but for the stories the world had lost the courage to keep. Outside, the wind moved sideways. Clouds curled like forgotten ink blots across the sky. The crows still circling no longer flapped their wings. They simply hovered, suspended by some force that belonged not to gravity, but to rhythm. And within Halden something began to change. It wasn't fear or awe, it was alignment. His bones adjusted first, as though shifting into a mold carved by some unknown architect. Then his thoughts slowed, like parchment unrolling to reveal lines he had not written, but had always known. "Your memory is not your own," Mesra whispered not aloud. "Not from lips, but through every part of the air. It belongs to all who came before you. You carry not knowledge, but inheritance." Halden nodded, though he didn't fully understand. And then she lifted her hand. Fingers jointed in copper and polished horn curled outward. In her palm sat a sphere no larger than a walnut, black, seamless, quietly vibrating. "A seed?" Halden asked. "No," she replied. "A history." He took it. The moment he did, The air trembled. The air trembled. Light moved upward, spiraling from the floor, into the walls, like veins finding a heartbeat again after centuries of stillness. Each panel of the six-sided room began to shift, rotating slowly, revealing slivers of other chambers, long-sealed stairways, and murals etched in forgotten script. Mesra did not rise, but she expanded, not in form but in reach. Her voice, once gentle and singular, now folded in layers, as though 1,000 echoes spoke in unison. "You must go deeper," she said. Below, where Feřon placed the cradle, Halden clutched the sphere to his chest. "And if I fail?" he asked. She tilted her head, not with doubt, but with clarity. "You won't. You've already succeeded." You came. Behind him a spiral stair descended into the floorstone, worn with centuries of feet that no longer lived. He turned and descended, one step, then another. Each footfall lit the walls, not with flame, with memory. Scenes flickered beside him as he moved. A child being taught to tie knots by her grandmother. A shepherd whispering to stars during a plague. A soldier burying a letter beneath a stone, hoping the soil would keep his promise. None of them his. All of them now part of him. He reached the bottom of the stair and entered a chamber, shaped like a broken compass, at the center. A cradle, but not for a child. It was a bed of gears, of copper leaves, of quartz veins. Hovering above it, a second sphere, larger, breathing, alive, but not aware, until Halden stepped close. Then it pulsed, once, and the room changed. The air became thick, like soup ladled from the pot of creation. The walls groaned not in warning, but in memory. Above, the tower answered with a hum. A Nesra's song, now a chorus, soaked down through the stone like a prayer maid. Mechanical. Halden placed the seed into the cradle. The second sphere opened, not with hinges, but with revelation. It unfolded like a flower in reverse petals, turning inward, swallowing its own secrets, until only light remained, and then silence, not absence, presence so full, so total, that even thought dared not move. In that silence, the intention of Feřon awoke. Halden saw not with eyes, but through the lattice of time. He saw Feřon at a workbench, surrounded by maps of sound, by spools of wind, by diagrams sketched in sweat and breath. He saw the first moment Mesra moved. He saw villages rise, and fall, and forget. He saw himself as a boy tracing letters in dust, copying names from a grave long leveled. He saw every person who had carried a fragment of the archive in their bones, and he wept again. But this time not from sorrow, from understanding. Feřon had not built a tower. He had built a womb for memory, a place where the stories too fragile to survive. The world could be reborn in those who chose to seek them, and Halden had come. He had remembered. Enough to find the path. He had become the new page. The sphere before him reshaped. It formed 3 smaller orbs, one of light, one of ash, one of rain. Mnesra. Single quotes as voice filled the chamber again. "These are your tools," she said. "To plant, to burn, to cleanse. Use them not with judgment, but with song." He reached forward, took them into his palm, and the cradle closed, not locked, resting above. The tower's panels spun open to the sky. The crows scattered not away, but outward, to deliver the signal. The archivist had returned. Not a king, not a prophet, just a man willing to remember. Halden climbed back up the stair, the spheres heavy with meaning in his pocket. When he emerged, Enesra stood noun, not taller, not larger, but somehow more complete. "Will I see you again?" he asked. She paused. "You will feel me, in wind that sings, in stones that hum, in names remembered, too long to be yours." He nodded, then turned toward the path. It would not be easy. The world was vast, and forgetting was always waiting. But now, he did not walk alone. He walked with the stories of 1,000 lives inside him. He walked with the hum of a tower at his back, and the memory of a machine who remembered everything, waiting, should the world ever forget again. The wind on the hill had changed, not colder, not sharper, but aware, as if each gust now carried a thread of memory plucked from the waking tower behind Halden, and loosed into the wide unknown. The crows had vanished into the dusk, their spiral, scattering across the sky like ink flung from a shaking quill. They had not fled. They had been sent. Messengers, warnings, heralds. Halden stood a long while at the threshold. Behind him, Mesra stood sentinel, not waving, not watching, just present as all true archivists are. She was the tower now, and the tower was her, a guardian of stories etched in silence, awaiting those brave or broken enough to seek their pieces again. He began to walk, down the winding path he had climbed, though now it felt different, less like descent, more like delivery. His feet did not stumble. The stones welcomed him. The mosses parted beneath each step, eager to feel the passing of a vessel that carried more than blood, for Halden was not just a man anymore. He was memory in motion. The spheres he carried nestled in a pouch near his ribs, light, ash, and rain, each pulsed with a rhythm not his own. Sometimes they grew warm, sometimes cool. Sometimes they whispered names he did not recognize, and yet mourned instantly, as though remembering lives he never lived, but somehow missed. When he reached the edge of Pakriti, he did not pause. The village was not asleep. It was listening. Windows glowed faintly, but no one stirred. Not a child, not a dog, not even the wind. Only the weight of attention bore down, polite, cautious. Reverent. A man stepped from a doorway, thin, elderly, wrapped in a coat of stitched leather and reeds, as though woven by hands that remembered too many winters. Archivist, he said. Halden's breath caught. It was not a title. It was recognition. I'm not, he began, but the man shook his head. You are, you returned. The tower breathes. Again, she sang to the stone. We heard her. Others emerged, quietly. Women with baskets, children clutching charms, men with lanterns whose flames did not flicker, though no glass shielded them. One by one they formed a circle, not close, not invasive, just enough to bear witness. Halden stood among them, unsure. What do you want from me? He asked. The old man smiled, his lips thin, cracked by time. Not what we want, what you must give. Stories, he said. The ones we forgot we had. He extended his hand not for greeting, but for trust, and Halden, without knowing why, reached into his pouch and drew forth the orb of light. It glowed faintly, then brightened. A warmth spread outward, not heat, but illumination like lanterns lit behind the eyes. Each villager blinked once, then twice, and then they remembered, all at once. The circle gasped. A woman dropped to her knees, her hands pressed to her mouth. My brother, she whispered. He sang to the fields in spring. He carved birds from cherry wood. I had forgotten by the saints, I forgot. A man staggered back. My mother's lullaby. It had a third verse. She used to hum it while boiling potatoes. I can hear it now. A boy, no older than 10, looked at Halden, wide-eyed. My name isn't just mine, he said. It was my great-grandfather's. He built the mill. Tears flowed freely, without shame, because memory, returned rightly, does not sting. It soothes. Halden fell to one knee, overwhelmed by the resonance. Each awakening rippled through him. His chest aches not from pain, but from expansion. His heart, once a solitary chamber, now echoed with countless voices. He stayed that night in the village, not in a house, in the square. The people wove blankets around him, set lanterns in a wide circle, and took turns sitting beside him in silence. Not asking, not offering, just sharing space. By dawn, the first decision had ripened. He could not stay. The spheres had grown restless, pulsing with greater intensity, like hearts anticipating labor. Their purpose was not to remain in one place. They were tools, rituals, keys, and the world was vast, and Ezra had said more would come. But it was not just seekers who would follow. It would be those who forgot on purpose, those who profited from silence, those who buried memory under monuments, and names under taxes, and they would not welcome an archivist. So Halden traveled west, past ridges where the trees leaned unnaturally eastward, bent by some long-ago storm that the land never fully forgave. He crossed rivers that sang beneath their ice, carrying the laughter of spring toward unseen oceans. He slept beneath cairns left by wanderers, who forgot their own names, but stacked stones to remember the road. And always, the spheres guided him. When he neared a place in need, they sang, faint. At first, then clearer. By the time he reached the town of Lethane, the orb of ash burned warm against his chest. Lethane was wounded, not visibly. The buildings stood, the trade flowed, the people smiled, but only on the surface. Beneath, a hollowness moved. He felt it before he passed the first threshold, eyes that didn't focus. Names spoken with hesitation. Laughter that stopped too quickly, as though the town had decided it was easier to forget than to grieve. He walked the main road, at dusk, lanterns lit, doors closed. The orb grew hotter. At the center of town stood a monumental statue of a man astride a stone lion, both faces worn, blank by wind. The plaque read only, for peace. Halden stood before it, unmoving. The townspeople watched from shadowed porches. Finally, a girl approached, no more than 15, barefoot, eyes sharp, with questions unspoken. "Who are you?" she asked. "Just a traveler," he replied. "Why are you looking at that?" She pointed to the statue. "No one remembers who he is." "Then why does he remain?" "Because it's easier that way." He nodded, and then, slowly, he drew. The orb of Ashdod held it in both palms, raised it toward the statue. At first nothing, then the ash shimmered, and then smoke, not from flame. From memory, it drifted downward, curling around the stone lion's paws, the rider's boots, the empty space where names once were, and then the truth began to bleed through. The man had not brought peace. He had erased it. He had burned the towns, passed to build his own image, silencing entire bloodlines to sculpt the legacy. But the people, afraid of remembering, had let the statue stand. Halden let the orb lower. He turned to the girl. "Do you want to know?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded, and the statue cracked, not in collapse. In release, a seam opened down the rider's chest. Within, not stone, but letters, names, pages, a hidden chamber. Someone had hidden the truth inside the lie. The townspeople gathered one by one. They read, not all stayed. Some wept, some walked away. Some stared long into the night and whispered names they hadn't dared speak in years. But in the morning, the statue was gone, not destroyed, dismantled, piece by piece. Carried to the river, returned to the flow. Halden left without ceremony. The orb of ash was dim now, Knut's task done. Two remained light. Rain, as he walked through the western woods, the trees leaned closer, the fog thickened. The path ahead was unclear, but he did not fear, for he knew now. The tower was not one place. It was wherever truth waited, beneath silence and memory. Once awakened, did not sleep again. The rains came without warning. No thunder, no wind, just water falling from a sky, the color of tarnished pewter. It began as a hush, a whisper through the canopy, the soft patter of memory dissolving into soil. And then it deepened, until the world blurred at the edges, and each step Halden took sank a little further into the softened earth. The last of the three spheres. The orb of rain had begun to glow, not bright, not urgent, but steady. It pulsed against his ribs, like a sleeping heartbeat roused by distant music. It wanted to be used. But not here, not yet. The rain was only the beginning. Halden followed the river, not by sight. By sound, the flood spoke, in low tones, murmuring secrets against moss-covered stones, carving through the hills with the patience of centuries. It led him west, then north, then into a valley so deep it seemed the sun had forgotten it. There, nestled in the basin, was a town without name, no sign, no road marker. Just sagging roofs, shuttered windows, and chimneys that hadn't breathed in years. The buildings leaned inward, as though huddling for warmth. Vines coiled like sleeping serpents around broken pillars. Time had not passed through here. It had collapsed. Halden stepped through the threshold of the town and felt the weight. Immediately, this was not silence, it was grief, thick, dense, the kind that wraps around the soul like wet wool and makes every breath feel borrowed. No children ran, no doors creaked open. Even the birds had left. He passed a well at the center of town dry, rimmed with ash. Nearby a church slumped sideways, its bell long since stolen or melted down. Yet the rain did not touch its roof. It avoided it, arcing away like memory, refusing to revisit certain thoughts. Holden paused. The orb of rain pulsed harder. Then a voice. "You shouldn't be here." He turned. A woman stood in the doorway of what had once been an inn. Her eyes were lined with years she did not carry in her face. Her hands held no weapon, yet her voice did. "This place has nothing for you." Holden did not answer immediately. He looked past her, into the shadowed hall behind her, and he heard them. Stories not spoken, not written, buried, hundreds, maybe, thousands. This was not just a forgotten town, it was a tomb. He stepped forward. "I didn't come to take," he said. "I came to water what was left." The woman frowned, then noticed the orb at his hip. Her eyes widened it, with recognition, but with fear. She stepped aside. "Then be quick, before the flood returns." He entered the inn, and the air changed. Cooler, denser, as though every breath brought in not just oxygen, but sorrow. The floorboards moaned beneath him, not from weight, from relief. No one had stepped there in years. At the center of the common room was a hearth, cold, empty, blackened by a fire that had ended too quickly. Holden knelt, drew the orb of rain, held it in both hands. He did not speak. He did not chant. He simply remembered faces he never knew, names he never heard, laughs that once echoed off these walls, tears cried into mugs, songs sung for weddings, and laments hummed at wakes. The orb brightened, and the hearth wept. A single drop fell into the ashes, then another, from the orb, from the roof, from memory itself. He did not know, but soon the hearth filled, not with fire, with tears. The water rose gently, bringing with it images, flickering like light through old glass, a couple dancing barefoot on the wooden floor, a boy chasing a dog past the tables, a group of elders toasting the first harvest of the year. The rain did not fall harder, but it fell truer. Outside, the town stirred, not in bodies, in foundations. Timbers straightened, vines loosened, doors creaked open as though inhaling for the first time in decades. The grief did not leave, but it moved, it shifted, became memory instead of weight. The woman returned, her hands trembling. "My son died in the river. During the last flood." Holden nodded. "And what was his name?" She hesitated, then spoke it. "Tolan." The orb pulsed outside. A tree bloomed bar from bare branch to blossom in a breath, and a single bird sang just one note, but it was enough. The town would never be what it was, but it would remember, and that was enough. Holden stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The orb dimmed. 3 spheres, 3 gifts, their immediate purpose fulfilled. But the world was not yet healed. He walked west again, past rivers now gentler, past hills now humming. The tower was still behind him, but now he carried it within, and in every step, he scattered seeds of fire, of ash, of rain. Not to burn, not to erase, but to remember. The road west was older than the trees that lined it. No signposts marked the path. No travelers crossed his way, but the ground itself remembered every step ever taken, and as Holden pressed onward, it welcomed him like an heir to a forgotten throne. 3 orbs rested quietly now. Fire, ash, and rain, each dimmed, each spent, but not silent. They had not gone dormant. They had become part of him, no longer tools, now echoes. And Holden himself, he was changing. His dreams had begun to shift, no longer fractured memories or whispers from the tower, but whole moments, full conversations with those long-dead visions of fields that had never grown in his lifetime, languages that his lips had never known but his tongue now spoke with ease. He was becoming an archive, not just a bearer of story, but a vessel for the world's own recollection. So when he reached the place called Drosmere, he already knew it by name. The village lay curled like a dying animal at the foot of a cliff. built around a stone quarry long since exhausted. Its roads were broken teeth, its walls sagging with damp. Yet something in the air shimmered, faintly like old gold buried. Beneath rust, Holden stepped into the silence and heard laughter. Not present, residual. The kind of sound that lingers like the scent of bread long after the ovens go cold. He walked slowly. Every footstep was a question, and the town answered. A door creaked open in the wind, not because someone stood behind it, but because someone used to. A child's wooden toy lay half buried in the muck, beside a well-painted once, in bright reds and greens, now faded to memory. The orb of ash pulsed once, gently, and then a figure emerged, old, bent, wrapped in robes, so patchy they might have once been banners. She did not speak, merely gestured with one finger and turned. Holden followed. They entered what had been the town hall, though now its roof was bowed, and the windows shuttered with cloth instead of glass. Inside, the scent of dust and dried herbs choked the air, but beneath it, something sweeter lingered. Ink. The woman led him to a back room, where scrolls were piled, hundreds of them, maybe more. Not official decrees or ledgers, stories, children's tales, recipes, riddles, personal letters, charms and chants. Your tower, she croaked, used to send people here. Long ago, we wrote what we remembered. We saved what we could. Then, the floods came, the fever, the silence. The remembering stopped. Holden stepped forward. He ran his fingers along one scroll, words etched in a language no longer spoken. But his lips moved of their own accord, and he read it aloud. May those who drink this broth recall their grandmother's voice. May the time wake laughter and the onions bind grief. He stopped. It wasn't a spell. It was a preservation. And Drosmir hadn't forgotten. It had hidden. A refuge of memory. A final vault. But even vaults decay without care. I need to read them all. Holden whispered. The old woman laughed, low and bitter. You don't have years. I don't need years. He reached into his pouch and drew forth the dimmest of the spheres, the orb of light. It had not pulsed since Pocreti, but now, in the presence of written memory, it stirred again. He held it above the scrolls, and they responded, not with fire or wind, but illumination. Each scroll glowed faintly. Lines of text lifted like mist from parchment. Letters untangled and danced into the air. The orb brightened as though drinking them in, not to destroy, but to preserve anew. The woman fell to her knees. I didn't know. Neither did I, Holden said. And then something strange happened. The orb didn't just store the stories. It shared them as the light touched Holden's brow. Images burst through his mind meals by candlelight. Lullabies hummed on rainy nights, marriage oaths whispered in trembling hands, arguments between brothers, secrets never meant to leave the page. The soul of a village, unfiltered and raw. He collapsed and dreamed in his dream. He stood in a vast chamber, not stone, not sky, but parchment. The walls were made of story, the floor a quilt of shared memory, the ceiling stitched from lullabies and warnings. A voice spoke, not Mesra, not his own. Every archivist must endure the burden of empathy. You have gathered, now you must carry. He woke gasping. The orb of light was gone, absorbed, rewritten, its purpose complete, and in its place. A new marking had formed on his wrist, 3 concentric circles, pulsing faintly with light. A sigil. He was no longer just a seeker. He was becoming a keeper the villagers gathered that night. Few remained in Drosmir, but those who had stayed longed to feel seen. So Holden sat by their fire and repeated their own stories, back to them not read, but remembered. They wept, they laughed. Some grew silent and stared into the flames for hours, and in the morning Holden left. No celebration, no procession, just quiet gratitude, and one old woman placing a sealed scroll in his hands. Take this one east, she said, to the place where the light bends. He did not ask what she meant. He would know when the time came. The world grew stranger as he walked. Forests tilted at angles that defied maps. Rivers whispered in forgotten cadences. Birds stared longer than birds should. He began to dream even. while awake seeing glimpses of faces just before he passed a tree, hearing names on the wind that vanished when he turned. Memory was bleeding. The world itself was remembering, and not all of it was gentle. One night, as he camped beneath a leaning moon, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, metal against stone. He stood from the shadows. Emerged 3 figures, cloaked, armored, each bore a symbol. An eye crossed with thorns. "You carry the sigil," one said. "I do. You walk in places that should remain lost." "They're not lost, they're stolen." The man stepped forward. "We serve the eclipse. We guard the mercy of forgetting." Holden felt the air thicken. These were not ordinary men. They were silencers. Agents of the order that once sought to seal the tower in dust. They did not burn books. They burned remembrance. "Stand aside," the silencer said. "Relinquish what you carry, and we will leave you with one good memory." Holden's hand closed around the orb of fire, not burning, but warning. "I have no memory worth keeping," he said, "if it comes at the cost of silencing others." The silencers drew blades not iron, bone, each etched with runes that shimmered only in moonlight. Holden did not flinch. The orb flared, and the fire that erupted was not red or orange but gold. Pure memory, unchained. The flames formed, not walls but stories. Faces spun in smoke. Voices cried out from the heat, and the silencers staggered, because memory, once released, cannot be unseen. They fled not in fear of Halden, but in fear of truth. And Halden, burned but not broken, collapsed beneath the tree. He slept for 3 days. When he woke, a child stood watching him, silent, eyes wide. The child handed him a carved figure, a small replica of the tower. Rough, but unmistakable. "I saw it," the child said, "in the fire." Halden smiled. The tower was calling again, and the world was finally beginning to answer. It began with a whisper beneath the stone. Not wind, not word, just a pull, a direction, a memory not yet remembered. Halden rose with the sun, though he had not slept. His body had lain still, but his mind had wandered deeper into echoes, into dust, into the marrow of a world too long silent. Each breath he took now felt borrowed from someone else's lungs, older, wiser, more tired than his own. The carved figure the child had left behind smiled crude. Unmistakably, the tower now pulsed faintly with heat. It was not magical. It was not alive. But it resonated with him, as though the stone had once heard the tower's breath and never stopped listening. He followed its pull eastward. The woods grew strange. The bark of trees curled inward like scrolls. Moss whispered in languages without vowels. Deer with golden eyes watched from afar, unblinking, as if recording every step for some forgotten chronicle. And then came the bridge. Not one built by hands. It was formed of stone but bent, bowed, twisted upward like a question carved into the world's surface. No river ran beneath it, only shadow. Beneath that darkness lay not water, but memory, forgotten, discarded, sealed beneath the surface by forces who believed silence was mercy. The orb of ash flared. A wind rose not cold, but ancient, smelling of parchment, candle smoke, and damp ink. Halden stepped onto the bridge. Each footfall echoed like a chapter's end, halfway across. The world below changed. The shadow gave way, and a vision emerged. A city, golden towers, domes kissed by light, streets lined with banners fluttering in eternal wind. Bells rang from 1,000 spires, voices sang in harmony, and laughter echoed between fountains of memory. It was Orlin, the city of echoes, but not as it should have been, as it might become again, and then knit, shattered the vision, cracked like glass under weight. The towers crumbled, the bells bent, the people screamed not in pain, but in silence. Their mouths moved, no sound came. Their eyes were full of erasure. A void swept over the vision like ink, spilled over parchment. And when Halden reached the other side of the bridge, the air was still. He was in the Wain, a stretch of land said to be cursed, unwalkable. No birds flew here, no maps marked it. No wind dared cross it. The soil was gray, the sky low. Trees stood like statues, petrified mid-sentence. But beneath it all, the world trembled, because buried under this quiet was a library, not one of books, one of bones. He found the first marker a mile in, a slab of stone etched with glyphs in a spiral writings from the first scribes. The language twisted inward, and as Halden touched it, the orb of fire sparked in protest. Not because it feared the words, because it recognized them. He traced them slowly, the script rising into his mind like breath returning to a drowned man. They buried not their dead, but their knowledge. Flesh holds memory, and so the archive shall never burn. Halden looked to the horizon and saw them, rising like a crown of thorns from the dead soil, 12 pillars of stone, each crowned with ash and bone. Beneath them, the remains of the last Librarium, the place where the first archivists fell, the place where the tower's original fragments had been sent to hide from the eclipse. He stepped into the ring of stones, and the world spoke. Not aloud, not in whispers, but in pressure, like standing in the breath of a giant. Each heartbeat pressed against his skin, tugged at his memories, called forth names he had never heard, but now knew: Syra, Thalon, Moral, scribes, guardians, sacrifices. Their bones were not scattered, they had been arranged in spiral paths, woven into the stone itself. Knowledge stored not in paper, but in marrow. Halden knelt. He drew the orb of rain from his pouch. The ground, dry as ash, drank the memory of water, and something beneath began to shift. A root, or perhaps a vein, twisted up from the ground, coated in mossy glyphs, pulsing faintly with ancient breath. He placed his palm upon it, and the world bled light, not bright, but deep. The ring of stones flared, and he saw them, the 12 each, a memory, each a whisper in robes of dust and ink, surrounding him in a circle of judgment. You walk with stolen memory, they intoned. I walk to return it, Halden said. You open doors best left shut. If they lead to truth, they should never have been closed. They studied him. Each gaze a decade, each silence a century. Then one stepped forward. The first archivist, her robes made of stitched vellum, her eyes voids filled with stars. You carry the tower in pieces, but the world no longer remembers its purpose. How will you make them care? Halden did not answer. He remembered. He called forth the village from Partwick, where the river had claimed lives, and grief built shelters from Ashdod. He summoned the scrolls of Drosmere, where children's riddles outlived their authors. He called the child who saw fire and carved a tower from memory alone. The orb of ash flared again, and the silence broke. Not in words, but in chorus. 1,000 voices rose not from the stones, not from the dead, but from the memory within him. Each story he had carried, each whisper he had honored, each wound he had tended, and the 12 stepped back. The first archivist raised her palm, a mark burned onto his chestoglyph, not of protection, but of permission. You may seek the heart. Halden gasped. He knew what that meant. The tower was not a place. It was a living memory, and its heart lay in the city, long erased from maps. Verdumere, the first capital, the last breath of the old language, the place where the eclipse had struck. Hardest he turned north. His journey would end where the world had forgotten itself. But first, he had to survive the threshold, a place where no light could pass, where even memory bent and broke as he stepped from the ring of stones. The pillars dimmed, but one whispered, "Beware the red quill." He turned, but the wind had already swept the voice away. Red quill, a name, a warning, a storm, the ink of betrayal. The tower had enemies not just in silence, but in story itself. The wind was thin in the north. It did not howl. It remembered every breeze that passed. Halden now carried with it fragments, words unsaid. Lullabies once hummed into cradleboards, screams muffled beneath years of dust. He walked through air, heavy with unspoken things, toward a place no road remembered. But his soul could not forget. Verdumere, the first capital, the last breath of the world. Before it turned its face away from memory, he passed through forests that leaned in close, trees whose bark wept sap like tears from forgotten dreams. Mountains hunched in shame, their peaks broken as if bowed beneath guilt. This land did not welcome him, but neither did it stop him, for what he carried was older than defiance. The mark on his chest burned brighter with each step, and then he saw, at Verdumere, no spires greeted him, no grand gates, just earth split open like a wound. Once, it had been a city of towers. Now, it was a crater, a bowl of bone and stone where the past had drowned itself in silence, and in the center of that wound, rising crooked from the charred ground, was a spiral of black iron. Not a building, not a statue, a quill, dipped eternally in the ink of the forgotten. The red quill, the last weapon of the eclipse. Halden stepped into the crater, and the world bent, not visibly, but inside him. His memories turned backward. His thoughts unraveled like old scrolls. He forgot his name, then remembered it, then forgot again. The 3 remaining orbs fire ash, and rain shook against his ribs like caged birds. He whispered the names of the places he'd been. Pochrady, Drosmere, the Wain. Each syllable held him to himself like stitching on a wound. He pressed forward. At the base of the red quill stood an arch, not of stone or steel but ink, suspended in the air, unmoving. Through it shimmered a version of the tower hull, tall, illuminated, but it was not real, it was a lie. A version preserved by the red quill's rewriting. And beyond that illusion, buried in the true earth, was the heart, the memory of all things. Halden raised the orbs, the fire flared, the ash wept, the rain poured upward, and the ink screamed, a shriek, without sound, but one that echoed in blood. The illusion cracked. The false tower trembled. The arch collapsed, and beneath it, the ground opened, not with a roar, but with a sigh. The stairway descended into blackness. He stepped down, each footfall erased part of the world, above its noise, its doubt, its hunger, and replaced it with silence so absolute, it vibrated. At the bottom was a door, no key, no lock, just a handle. He reached out and paused. He was not afraid. He was ready. He had carried the stories. He had bled for them, burned for them, wept for them. He turned the handle and entered the heart of the tower. There was no room, no walls, only a vast, endless field of floating memory. Stories drifted like stars. Each one pulsed with lives billions of moments, from kings to beggars, from mothers in childbirth to thieves in alleys. All the memory of the world before the silence, and in the center, a chair, empty, the archivist's throne. He stepped toward it, and the 12 stood in his path. Not as ghosts, but as keepers. You seek the seat, they said. I seek restoration. To sit, you must give. I have given. Not enough. He closed his eyes, and he gave. He offered the laughter of Parderwick's children, the songs of Drosmere's fires, the dust-etched prayers of the Wain. He offered his own pain, his sleepless nights, the names he'd carried, the wounds never healed. He offered the boy with the carved tower. He offered the face of his mother, long lost, and he offered the part of himself that had once wished to forget. The orbs shattered. The sigils burned white-hot, then vanished. The 12 stepped aside. Halden sat down, and memory returned, not just to him, to the world. The tower rose again, not from stone, but from remembrance. Its spire pierced the sky like a quill redrawn. Towns forgotten were recalled. Names whispered only in dreams were spoken aloud. The air itself grew full, heavy with song, prayer, story, and grief that no longer had to be hidden. The silence was over. The red quill cracked and crumbled, not destroyed, rewritten. Halden did not weep. He simply breathed, and the world remembered how to breathe with him.